Whoa, hold up there, buddy. Couriers use the service entrance around back.
I'm not a courier. I'm going to my office. Check the card.
Look, badges get faked every day. You don't look like you're on the list.
I own this company. Step out of my way right now.
That's it. You're trespassing. Turn around or you're in cuffs.
Touch me again and you will lose your job today.
The difference between ownership and intrusion is often just a matter of who is standing at the door. On a humid Tuesday morning in Tampa, in the heart of Ybor City's revitalization district, that difference collapsed into a 40-minute standoff that would eventually expose the fragile nature of authority, when it is built on bias rather than policy. This wasn't a case of a lost visitor or a malfunction at the security desk. It was a collision between a man who had built a hospitality empire from the ground up and a system designed to view him as a threat to his own creation. Maurice Scott arrived at the Kingswell Lane headquarters at 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes earlier than his usual Tuesday routine. The building, a restored industrial structure that housed both the boutique hotel operations and the corporate executive suites, was a symbol of everything he had fought to secure. For Maurice, this building wasn't just an asset on a balance sheet. It was a sanctuary. Growing up in a neighborhood where stability was a luxury, and the roof over your head could vanish with a missed paycheck or a landlord's whim. Maurice had developed a survivor's obsession with security. He didn't just own the building, he knew the pulse of it. He knew that the HVAC system rattled on the third floor when the humidity spiked. He knew the cleaning crew's shift change by the sound of the service elevator, and he knew that safety meant control. He walked through the sliding glass doors wearing a dark navy tracksuit and running shoes, carrying a leather messenger bag that looked distressed, but cost more than most people's first cars. He had just come from a site visit at a property under renovation down the street, where he preferred to walk the floors before the contractors poured the concrete. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing the visual armor that society often demands of black men in high-value spaces to prove they belong. He was simply Maurice Scott, the CEO, walking into work. Stationed at the new security console, a marble and glass fortress installed only 3 weeks prior, was Brock Caldwell. Brock was new to the contract, a supervisor brought in by the external security firm to tighten up access protocols after a minor theft incident in the loading dock the previous month. Brock sat with the posture of someone who believed his chair was a throne. He was scanning a clipboard, his radio sitting on the desk, next to a half-drunk energy drink. He didn't look up as Maurice approached the turnstiles. Maurice pulled his platinum-level access card from his pocket. This wasn't a standard employee badge. It was an all-access pass coded to override every lock in the building from the server room to the penthouse suites. He held it to the reader. The reader chirped a distinct, sharp tone, and the light flashed green. The mechanical arm of the turnstile clicked open. "Hold it right there," a voice boomed from the desk. Maurice paused, his hip already pressing against the turnstile arm. He looked over his shoulder. Brock Caldwell was standing up now, moving around the desk with a speed that suggested he had been waiting for a reason to move. "Machine's acting up," Brock said, stepping directly into Maurice's path, effectively blocking him from pushing through the open gate. "You need to step back." It flashed green. Maurice said, his voice level. He didn't shout. He didn't recoil. He simply stated the fact. "The gate is open." "I said the machine is glitching. It's been reading false positives all morning." Brock lied. The lie was smooth practiced. He looked Maurice up and down, his eyes lingering on the tracksuit and the dust on Maurice's sneakers from the construction site. "Deliveries go through the side entrance. Courier services know that. You can't cut through the lobby just because the door is open." "I'm not a courier," Maurice said. He turned his body fully toward Brock, maintaining the distance but claiming his space. "I work here. I'm going to my office on the 5th floor. 5th floor is executive suites." Brock said, a smirk touching the corner of his mouth. It was a dismissal wrapped in a statement of fact. "Maintenance and custodial clock in at the basement level. If you're new, you need to report to the facilities manager downstairs. You don't come through the glass doors." The air in the lobby seemed to freeze. A few hotel guests were checking out at the far counter, and the concierge, a young woman named Sarah who had been hired 2 months ago, looked up. She frowned, squinting across the lobby, but the morning glare on the polished floor made it hard to see exactly who was standing by the turnstiles. Maurice felt that familiar heat rising in his chest, the physiological spike of adrenaline that every survivor knows. It was the body preparing for a fight it didn't want. His hands gripping the strap of his bag tightened until his knuckles were pale. He took a slow breath, forcing his heart rate to decouple from his anger. He knew the rules of this game. If he raised his voice, he became the aggressor. If he stepped forward, he became a threat. If he showed the rage, he felt he validated Brock's bias. "I am not maintenance," Maurice said, articulating every consonant. "My name is Maurice Scott. This is my building. The badge is valid. I am going to my office. Brock let out a short, derisive laugh. He shook his head, looking around the lobby as if performing for an audience. Right. And I'm the mayor of Tampa. Look, buddy, I don't know where you found that card or who gave it to you, but you're not getting up those elevators. Hand over the card. I'm not giving you my card, Maurice said. Then you're trespassing, Brock said, his voice dropping an octave, shifting from mocking to menacing. And that means I'm removing you. Last chance. Walk out or you go out in cuffs. This was the trap. The reputation trap. Brock was banking on Maurice resisting physically so he could justify force. He wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in submission. Maurice reached into his pocket, moving slowly. Brock's hand instantly went to the pepper spray canister on his belt. Don't reach, Brock shouted loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. Hands where I can see them. I am taking out my phone, Maurice said, freezing his motion, to call the director of operations. Or you can check the access log on your screen. It just registered my entry. It will show my name and photo. Brock didn't look at the screen. He didn't even glance at the monitor that was glowing less than 3 feet away from him. This was the moment the interaction shifted from a misunderstanding to willful negligence. Brock refused to look at the evidence that would disprove his bias. I'm not looking at your phone, and I don't care what the screen says if the card is stolen, Brock snapped. Turn around, hands on the turnstile, now. I am not doing that, Maurice said. Brock lunged. It wasn't a strike, but a shove, a hard physical check to Maurice's shoulder intended to spin him around. Maurice stumbled back a step, catching his balance on the glass partition. The sound of the impact flesh against synthetic fabric against glass echoed in the high-ceilinged room. You put your hands on me, Maurice said. The shock was evident in his voice, not that he had been stopped, but that the escalation had happened so fast. You're resisting, Brock yelled, pulling the radio from his belt. Dispatch, I have a hostile trespasser in the main lobby, refusing commands, physical altercation initiated. Roll TPD. The phrase, physical altercation initiated, was the lie that would have sealed Maurice's fate in a different world. But this was Maurice's world, and he had built it with redundancies. Anchor, a one visual/audio. Record high above the reception desk. The dome camera IDLBY-01 was recording in 4K resolution. The timestamp in the upper right corner read 084812. The footage, which would later be reviewed by the legal team, showed clearly that Maurice had his hands at his sides, palms open when Brock Caldwell stepped across the threshold and shoved him. There was no resistance. There was no aggression. There was only a man standing in his own lobby being assaulted by his own contractor. The commotion drew attention. Sarah, the concierge, finally stepped out from behind the desk. She had been trained to stay put during security incidents, but something about the voice shouting, "I own this building," triggered a memory. She had seen Maurice speak at the company town hall 3 months ago. Mr. Scott, she called out, her voice uncertain. Brock whipped his head around. Stay back, Sarah. He's aggressive. No, Sarah said, moving closer. She was young 22, putting herself through hospitality school. She was shaking, but she kept walking. That's Mr. Scott. That's the CEO. He's a trespasser with a stolen badge. Brock spat, turning back to Maurice, effectively dismissing her. He raised the pepper spray. Get on the ground now. Maurice didn't move. He stood tall, his eyes locked on Brock's. He was terrified not of the spray, but of what would happen when the police arrived. He knew the statistics. He knew that when TPD rolled up to a hostile trespasser call, they wouldn't ask for business cards first. They would see a large black man and a uniformed guard, and they would act on the visual cue. But then the elevator doors pinged open. It was the morning coffee rush. A group of 6 employees from the marketing department and 2 from finance were heading out to the cafe across the street. They stepped into the lobby, chatting, phones in hand. They stopped dead when they saw the scene. They saw Brock red-faced, holding a canister of chemical spray. They saw Maurice, their boss, backed against the turnstile. It didn't take a meeting to decide what to do. There was no hesitation. Elena, a senior marketing manager, dropped her tote bag on the floor. Maurice, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Stay back. Brock warned them, waving his free hand. Police are en route. Elena didn't stay back. She stepped forward. Then David, a junior analyst, stepped up beside her. Then the others. They didn't attack Brock. They didn't scream. They simply walked between Maurice and the guard. They formed a human wall. You need to lower that weapon, Elena said, her voice shaking but loud. This is Maurice Scott. He is the CEO of this company. You are making a massive mistake. I don't care who he says he is, Brock yelled, though the confidence was cracking in his voice. He was outnumbered now, surrounded by people in business casual attire who were looking at him like he was the criminal. "It's not who he says he is," David said, pulling out his own phone and holding it up, recording. "It's who we know he is. You need to back off right now." The physical barrier of the employees changed the dynamic instantly. Brock couldn't spray Morris without spraying 6 other people, most of whom were white or non-black, creating a visual tableau that confused his bias-driven protocol. He lowered the canister slightly, taking a step back toward his desk. "You're all interfering with a security operation," Brock stammered. "I'm logging this. You're all getting written up." "Call HR," Maurice said from behind the wall of his people. His voice was raspy, the adrenaline dumping into his system now making his knees feel like water. "Call distinct line 1. Get quiet. Everyone just stay calm." Sarah, the concierge, was already on the phone. She hadn't called 911. She had called the penthouse office. "Diane, it's Sarah. You need to come down. Security is trying to arrest Mr. Scott." "Yes, now." The minutes that followed were a blur of suffocating silence. Brock stood by his desk, chest heaving, trapped by his own escalation. He couldn't retreat because that would admit error. He couldn't advance because of the human wall. He settled for typing furiously on his terminal, likely trying to fabricate a log entry that justified his actions. Maurice leaned against the glass partition. He didn't thank his employees yet. He couldn't trust his voice. He just nodded to Elena, a small tight dip of his chin. She nodded back, her eyes wet. She didn't leave his side. 2 minutes later, the elevator doors opened again. This time it wasn't the coffee crew. It was Diane Vance, the VP of Operations, and Michael Thorne, the company's general counsel. They didn't walk, they marched. Michael Thorne was a man who spoke in paragraphs that could end careers. He was holding a file folder, but he didn't need it. "Officer," Thorne's voice projected across the lobby, sharp as a razor. "Step away from the console." Brock looked up, startled. "I'm waiting for PD. We have a situation." "The only situation," Thorne said, closing the distance, "is that you have assaulted the owner of this property and unlawfully detained him. I am general counsel. You are done here." He refused to identify, Brock argued, pointing a shaking finger at Maurice. "He tried to breach the perimeter." "He used his badge," Elena shouted from the group. The light turned green. We all heard it. Anchor B2, access/presence record. Thorne didn't argue. He walked around the desk, invading Brock's bubble. He leaned over the keyboard and hit a single key to wake the secondary monitor. "The door badge access log is right here," Thorne said, reading the screen loud enough for the room to hear. 8:48:10 a.m., user Scott Maurice, access level platinum/owner, status granted, entry point lobby turnstile A. Thorne straightened up and looked at Brock with cold clinical disdain. "The system didn't flag him. You did. The screen has his photo, his title, and his clearance right there in bright green letters. You had to look past it to accuse him." Brock stared at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. The photo of Morris wearing a suit in the picture stared back at him. The granted status was blinking. It looked like a glitch," Brock mumbled. "He didn't look like the picture." "Because he's not wearing a tie," Maurice spoke up. He stepped out from behind his employees. The fear was ebbing, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "Or because you decided that a black man in a tracksuit couldn't possibly be on the other side of that gate." Sirens wailed outside. The TPD cruisers were pulling up to the curb. Blue lights flashed through the glass, painting the lobby in chaotic bursts of color. This was the dangerous moment. The police were coming into a hostile trespasser call. "Everyone hands visible," Maurice commanded, his leadership instinct overriding his trauma. "Do not give them a reason. Michael, you do the talking." 2 police officers rushed through the doors, hands on their holsters. They saw the crowd. They saw the guard. "Who's the subject?" The lead officer barked, scanning the room. Brock opened his mouth to speak, to try and salvage his narrative, to paint Maurice as the threat one last time. "There is no subject here, officer," Michael Thorne interjected smoothly, stepping between the police and the group. He held up his hands, palms out, non-threatening but authoritative. "I am Michael Thorne, legal counsel for this building. This is a false alarm initiated by a contractor who is currently being relieved of duty. The gentleman in the tracksuit is Mr. Maurice Scott, the owner of this property." The officer paused. He looked at Brock, who was now pale and shrinking back against the marble desk. He looked at Maurice, who stood surrounded by a protective ring of staff. He looked at the high-quality surroundings. The call said physical altercation. The officer said, relaxing his posture slightly but keeping his hand near his belt. We have CCTV footage of the guard shoving the property owner, Thorne said. We are preserving it right now. We are happy to provide a statement, but we are requesting that this officer be removed from our premises immediately. The officer looked at Brock. That true, you shove him. Brock couldn't speak. He just looked down. The silence that followed was heavy, the sound of a power dynamic shattering. The fallout was swift, procedural, and absolute. Maurice didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply went upstairs to his office, his legs shaking, only after the elevator doors closed. He sat in his chair looking out over the city he helped build and wept for exactly 2 minutes. Then he washed his face and went to work. By noon, Brock Caldwell was not only removed from the site, he was fired by the security contracting firm. The firm, terrified of losing the multi-million-dollar account with Maurice's hotel group, didn't just apologize. They offered a sacrificial lamb. But Maurice didn't want a lamb. He wanted structural change. He rejected the security firm's initial offer to just replace the guard. Instead, he leveraged the breach of contract. He forced the security company to overhaul their training protocols. The payoff path PP2 began 3 days later. The security firm issued a public retraction of the trespassing allegation, clearing any record of the police call from Maurice's name. They were contractually mandated to implement a new identity verification first training module designed specifically to counter implicit bias and access control. Every guard in their employ had to take it. Furthermore, the regional supervisor who had hired Brock and ignored previous complaints about his aggression was removed from oversight of the account. Maurice held a town hall the following week. He stood on the stage looking out at Elena, David, Sarah, and the others. Some people think safety is about locks and guards, Maurice told them. But last Tuesday, safety was you. It was the people who stood up when the system failed. He didn't fire the security firm entirely, not yet. He kept them on a probationary leash, forcing them to report quarterly on their diversity training and disciplinary actions. He made them better by force of will. Maurice still walks into his building every morning. He still wears his tracksuit sometimes. But now when he taps his card, he doesn't look over his shoulder. He looks at the guard, a new hire named Marcus, who knows everyone's name and nods. And Marcus nods back. First, it is crucial to recognize that the reputation trap used by the antagonist, labeling a calm response as aggressive, is a documented tactic used to justify escalation against marginalized groups. Second, the story highlights the importance of objective anchors like the digital access log and CCTV. In real-world scenarios, immediately preserving this data is the single most effective legal defense. Third note, how the employee's intervention was nonviolent but physically obstructive. They used their presence to de-escalate, which is a key principle of bystander intervention. Fourth, the resolution did not rely on the victim fighting back physically, which likely would have ended in arrest, but rather on institutional leverage, general counsel, and collective witness testimony. Finally, remember that while this story had a resolution, the psychological toll of having one's ownership questioned in their own space is a lasting injury that policy changes alone cannot fully heal. Some elements are selectively fictionalized for education.